This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
What we often miss is the fear that comes up from our subconscious and is created by our belief system. Our world has increasingly become fear-based, but when we don't understand the sources of this fear, we can't heal them. We each hold collective fears, like dying in a pandemic, and individual fears, many of which we aren't aware of because they arise from conditioning and deeply embedded beliefs. We are meant to live in joy, not in fear. Even if everyone around us is in fear, this doesn't have to be our personal experience. By taking us on a treetop journey through quantum physics, psychology, philosophy, spirituality, and more, a book on fear gives us tools and awareness to see where our fear comes from. When we see how our belief systems were created, how they limit us, and what we have become attached to that creates fear, we will come to know ourselves at a deeper level. Then we can make different choices to transform our fears. The end of each chapter includes a suggested simple exercise that can be done quickly, but that will shift the reader into an immediate higher state of awareness about that chapter's topic. Once we bring awareness to how we may have operated unconsciously before, we set out on the road to positive change. Author and entrepreneur Lawrence Doochin is someone who has experienced, processed, and released a great amount of fear. Allow him to guide you out of the fear tunnel and back into the sunlight. Valeria Tellez interviews Lawrence Doochin, the author of A Book on Fear, Feeling Safe in a Challenging World. Lawrence Doochin is an author, entrepreneur, and devoted husband and father. A survivor of harrowing childhood sexual abuse, he traveled a long journey of emotional and spiritual healing and developed an in-depth understanding of how our beliefs create our reality. In the business world, he has worked for or been associated with enterprises from small startups to multinational corporations. He is the co-founder of Huso Sound Therapy, which delivers powerful healing benefits to individuals and professionals worldwide. In everything Lawrence does, he strives to serve a higher good. Meet Lawrence at lawrencedoochin.com. Here is the interview with Lawrence Doochin.
In your own words, who is Lawrence Doochin?
Well, I'm an author, I'm an entrepreneur, I am a servant of God and life. I'm a father, devoted father and husband, and try to be a very kind and helpful and growing individual.
So God and religion, spirituality, we talk a lot about these subjects here. So my first question to you is, what, where, and who is God?
Wow, I've not had that question. God is God is us. God, we are one with God. So God, we're not separate from God. I think that's the most important thing that we have to realize, because all of what appears to be troubles in the world comes from a belief that we are separate from God. So we are. To me, God is spirit. God is all. God is consciousness. God is creation. God is truth. God is love. And we are also all of those same qualities.
I love that idea. I mean, it resonates with the heart, what I know to be true, that God is everywhere and it's not separate from anyone. So I'm wondering why we choose not to believe that. Would you say it's because of, I mean, it has to do with fear, I know, but another thing that I think about is the dark side or the less developed side of ourselves. Do you think that this is the reason why we create this disconnect?
I think that there is definitely a dichotomy here, or a polarity here between what we call good and evil, and that's a long-standing thing. But I also see, but everything, even what we call evil, is divine. It's just ignorance of the divine. So we come here, and we come here to in a place of to forget, so that we can then remember. And that's what we're all being pushed to do right now, both on a individual and collective scale, is to wake up and remember who we are as divine beings.
So, another question I often ask is, did we choose to come here in a human body and forget that essence of love?
I think we did, because basically we are that's part of, this is partly a play. It's a game. It's a school of learning, and the way that we've set up the school of learning is to forget, and then to have joy and holiness and just everything amazing as we remember. That's the part of remembering is what makes us, is what's so amazing. And we're doing it in this 3D reality where we have senses and where we can connect with other, quote, parts of God, nature and other individuals. And so they're all one, but they also appear separate from us. And so as we awaken to our divinity, we embrace all of that paradox. It's a big paradox. And so, yeah, to answer your question, yes.
How did you come to these deep understandings about God and about life in yourself? And another follow-up question is that a belief system or a knowing?
Well, I think that to answer your question first, we move from a belief system to a knowing, because when you talk about a belief system, belief systems change. They're changing every moment. We just don't recognize. Most people don't recognize that. But anybody can say, they can look back and see how their beliefs were different, a day before, a year before, 10 years before, and see how they evolve. So anything that's like a belief is not permanent. It's something that is just a vehicle for us to remember who we are. And when you have a believer, when you talk about a believer, you're also talking about something to be believed in. So that's obviously a believer and something separate from you. That is duality right there.
Right.
So when we move into a space of consciousness where basically our beliefs, it's really a space of consciousness. I believe Jesus, let me say it this way. Jesus lived in a space of consciousness where he did not have any beliefs. Right. He just knew his oneness. Mm-hmm. And when he asked for something from that space of oneness, it was granted. So that's what we're doing, is we're all evolving from a space of a belief system to a space of knowing. And those who are most hardened in their belief system are the ones who are most in fear. Right. Mm-hmm. And to answer the second part of your question, I'm sorry, the first part of your question. So basically, the way that I was pretty much asleep. I was sexually abused by my mother when I was going through puberty, and that had a very transformative experience on me in terms of coming out of that experience with a lot of fear, guilt, shame, anger. I went through a very intense emotional and spiritual healing process in my 30s and in my 40s, and even, I mean, still, I'm still being polished as of today.
Yeah.
So we are, I think this is what I chose, obviously, and the sexual abuse was actually a vehicle for that healing to come about.
So, in a way, you're also saying that we choose the awakening experiences.
Yes, for sure. Because as I was working through working through all of the threads that came off of the emotional healing from the sexual abuse, I was also working through things related to God. For instance, I had a lot of guilt over what happened with my mother, and then that was my vehicle for working through guilt that I had related to my experience with God.
Right.
Because collectively, we live in a place. And I'm not saying that every single person walking the planet has this, but obviously a very large majority are coming from a place of guilt and a belief that God is a punishing God, that we've sinned. And this is something that even if you don't believe in God or in religion or anything, spirituality, anything like that, you're still in the collective that believes this. And so that is what we have to divest ourselves of, so that we know that we have not sinned, that we are holy divine beings, and that we are co-creators with God.
My other warm-up question is freedom. What is freedom to you? What is to be free?
Freedom is being in a place where you're not in judgment, and you're in a place that's both self-judgment and judgment of others, which are basically the same. But also, freedom is also being in a place of compassion and love, and being in the now. I'm experiencing the now more and more on a very constant basis, and it's just a place of amazing freedom and joy and love, and fear cannot be present in that place.
Going back to the idea of belief systems and spirituality, do you see a difference between religion and spirituality?
I do, because religion is a type of structure that it's kind of like a garden hose, and you're trying to put a huge amount of water through a garden hose, and there's only a certain amount of water that can travel through that garden hose. And so the beliefs, the constructs that we've been given in religion, especially Western religion, about being a God, being a punishing God, or sin and judgment, and all of these things that are false, even though there are some positive, we're told that God is love, and there's other positives, but it's kind of like it's like a construct. It's like the water hose that only a certain amount of water can flow through. So spirituality for me is more, first off, I define that as everything that is, because everything is spirit. This is not something that's spiritual and there's something that's not spiritual. Okay, everything is spirit. And so we're just coming back to a recognition of that. And when we do that, we are expanding ourselves basically to infinity, which is oneness with all that is, because God is infinite. And so you're not constricted by a water hose. That water hose is infinite.
Do you believe in reincarnation or some form of life after life?
I believe that the terminology past lives is I think has become kind of, I don't like that term, and I'll tell you why. Because it makes, first off, it makes it seem like things are linear, and they're not. Okay, and it also these lives that we say that we have lived are things that are still within the illusion. So what I like to refer to it as, we are multidimensional beings living maybe an infinite number of realities at the same time. So it's not linear. It's not, what I recommend to people is that they constantly expand their horizons in terms of how they look at everything. So, I say obviously look at how Jesus lived his life. Look at how what he did and what he not believed, but what he knew. He knew his oneness, and we maybe we can't get there today, but we know what we're reaching for. And so, if we know that if we're holding the knowing that we're multidimensional beings living many realities, then we can kind of surrender to that and allow life to bring us to flow through us and bring us those awarenesses that we need to have so that we can live in that reality versus just this 3D, ego-centered reality.
And I also wonder, what are the signs? Are there specific signs once we are there, although there's no destination, but once we are aware and in that reality that's multidimensional, what are the signs, Larry?
Well, I think that the first time that you're truly in the now, and that you have a knowing of something, of a greater self within you, you will know that it is so distinct from the other reality of the 3D reality that you're living in your mind, that you will know that. So, but the signs are basically, it's just an immense amount of peace and joy and desire to be of service, and coming from an open heart, and the desire to be of service. We are so grateful to the Creator, to God, however you want to define that term, for our creation, that when we truly open up, what we want to do is we want to be of service to others without anything. It's not without anything coming back to us, because we get a lot back in terms of the joy. It's like a loop, but without anything needing affirmation of our worth, that we've done something for somebody else, because that's a false kind of service. A true kind of service is the service that you do when nobody else knows about it. It's just you and God, and maybe that other person, or maybe that other person doesn't even know about it. Maybe you're praying for somebody, or maybe you just, maybe you just smile at somebody in the grocery. Service can be very simple. And in this 3D reality, we try and make it like this big old thing, whatever, and then all this dogma and structures get put on it. And service is, look at what Mother Teresa did. I mean, that's service.
So it doesn't have to be anything big. So that's the construct of the ego mind, right, Larry?
That's the construct of the ego mind, because the ego mind is always looking for something to affirm its worth. And the ego mind is very judgmental. It's very scared. It's, but it's also an important tool here, because we live in a 3D reality. We need a personality. We need to be able to logically think through things, but it's meant to be like a hammer that you pick up and you put back down. Unfortunately, as we know, the large majority of people live in their ego mind all the time, and that's the only lens through which they see the whole world. And that's very sad. And that's the way that I operated for a very long time. And that's very sad, because there's so much richness in this life, what's available to us. And if we're chasing trinkets that have no worth, and God has given us the kingdom inside of us. And we just need to stop chasing the trinkets. We need to take a look at our false beliefs. We need to, we have to want to heal. We have to want to remember. We have to want to, come into a knowing of our unity, because that is why we're here. I mean, we're right here for that purpose.
Another question that I often ask is why so many of us choose not to go deeper and to awaken.
Well, I think it's a normal human reaction, which is resistance to pain and suffering. Actually, suffering is a resistance to pain, but nobody likes to feel. I mean, we don't like to feel pain. We don't like to feel sadness, but that's a part of life. I mean, God gave us. We're going to be sad at times. We're going to be angry at times. These are God-given emotions, and so most people, you can see in the world how all of these hacks. It's whether it's like antidepressant medications, or trying to do some kind of neurofeedback hack on the brain or whatever so that you're never feeling sad. Well, that's not how we're meant to live here. That's not practical. And you're going to, unfortunately, mess yourself up a lot by trying to do that as opposed to just allowing life to flow through you. And that's going to mean that sometimes you're very joyful, sometimes you're sad, sometimes, you're peaceful, sometimes you're angry. I mean, it's just, but then we have to bypass judgment. We can't judge those states within us. So it's really talking about seeing our beliefs. We see our beliefs by seeing our emotions and reactions, and then realizing where we're triggered, and then we see the beliefs behind those triggers, and then we see the conditioning, both societal and individual conditioning that cause that, and say, oh, that doesn't serve me because it's created all these dysfunctional relationships, or it's done whatever, and that doesn't serve me, and I'm going to drop that.
So basically work, and it might not be just fear that most people don't do that, don't awaken, but because of the work that it requires.
Yeah, that's very true. But what I would say to people is that you are in a prison cell of your own making. And your choice is, do you want to stay in that prison cell of your own making? Because you think you're joyful, but you're not really joyful. I mean, you get, it's an ego joy. You get ego, if your sports team wins, you're joyful, but when they lose, you're depressed, or you lose, life just tosses you around like a rag doll. So do you want to be like that, or do you want to be where you have a center of joy and peace all the time?
And is that possible, Larry, to be peaceful and joyful all the time?
I definitely think it is. I'm not there, but I know I'm there a lot, and I know it is. And so when we talk about like being sad, let's say an animal passes, or a person we love passes, or we're sad for the world because so many people are doing things that are not in their best interest and best interest of the whole, or we're sad for Mother Nature because it's being pillaged or whatever. We can be sad, or we can be angry, but we can still, that undercurrent of joy is always still there underneath that, because that joy comes from knowing our unity and knowing, that we're part of creation.
Well, it's not a belief system. It's a knowing that there is a place that knows. That's where the inner peace comes from.
Right. I mean, and it's really, it's a knowing, and it's also an experiential thing. I mean, it's an experiential thing more than what we experience as in a human body. It's like at a soul level, and it's the perfect merging of the soul and the human. And that's why we're here. That's the experience we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of it. There were people, there's a number of reports for people who were in concentration camps in the World War II who were some of the most joyful people ever, because it's how you view things.
We might call that a miracle or magic.
Yeah, I think a big part of joy, finding your joy, is basically not fighting life. Most of us fight life, okay, instead of just flow with life and to accept that life is going to take care of us, and that's going to flow us to something probably much, much better than we could ever imagine. So we need to get out of our heads and just get in our hearts and just flow with life. It doesn't mean that we're not initially angry about something that happens, if it's a hard circumstance or whatever, but we can be a victim, or we can be a warrior. And as a warrior, we can know that we are, that life is going to take care of us, and that we're part of this amazing unity of creation, and that there's so much joy in that.
So how did you become a writer? And what was the intention of writing your book, a book on fear, feeling safe in a challenging world?
Well, I did not set out to be a writer. I think that was obviously a God-given gift for a purpose. So, and I didn't, I've written several books before, but this book was, I started getting what I call like a major download in August of 2019, and a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine who's very in tune with the divine, told me I needed to go ahead and write this book. And I wasn't sure if I thought it was going to be two books, one book. I wasn't sure what the topic was. And somebody may think that I put this out like for the pandemic or whatever, but I didn't. Actually, I realized in January, a year ago, that this was supposed to be a book on fear. It's like, oh, just one day, oh, okay, this is supposed to be a book on fear because like I consider myself kind of an expert on fear because I've processed a huge amount of fear. I'm like, okay, I'm a pretty good person to write this book, and so, it was very divinely orchestrated. And I'm grateful that, I'm grateful I got out of the way on this book much more than I did on previous books. And the book to me has a very strong energetic coming through there. And I'm grateful for that.
Would you say that intuition, the voice of God, the divine force, it's all the same thing, really? Or somehow different?
I think it is, and I think it also ties into the heart, coming from an open heart, being in the now. These are all intertwined.
So fear, you write, you do write really well about fear. I do have some questions here, perhaps not too many though, because you have explored a lot that topic. But you say what we often miss is the fear that comes up from our subconscious, and it is created by our belief system. And you wrote more than that, of course. So I guess my question is about the hidden fears. So how do we learn to recognize them from moment to moment?
Yeah, good question. So, the first thing we have to do is we have to want to recognize them. And there's a lot of people who we talk about don't want to heal. So, but you have to say, okay, my life is not serving me in some purpose. So I want to discover these hidden fears. And so there's fears that we hold collectively, and there's fears that are individual. And our individual fears are very different based on especially childhood conditioning, or it could be a workplace conditioning, abusive situation, certainly societal conditioning we take on to different degrees. And then there's also intergenerational trauma that's been shown that gets passed on the DNA. So to answer your question is, a lot of these hidden fears are ones that are buried really deep because we're afraid to take a look at them. And we think that they're going to there's a part of us that thinks they're going to kill us if they come out in the open, somebody else finds out about them. But some of these fears are, let me say, a surface fear might be somebody might recognize, like, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have a significant other. Okay. The underlying fear to that may be, I'm afraid that I'm not lovable or worthy. Okay. So, but there's a lot of other fears. Like, for instance, as an abuse victim, I had a fear that I would not be in control of situations. That still affects me a little bit. That's a big thing for abuse victims because that keeps them safe. We also have fears, hidden fears, like maybe not meeting our own or others' expectations. And then the big hidden, and some mostly hidden, but some people may be aware of this, but the big fear is what happens when we die. Who or what are we going to meet? So, to become aware of these fears, again, you have to be aware of how you're triggered. So you want to watch your emotions and reactions in certain situations. And usually we're not angry for the reasons we think. We're angry because of fear. We're angry because of guilt behind that. We're angry because of maybe grief or some, sadness behind that. Carl Jung, who was the father of analytical psychology, said that projection is one of the most common phenomenons. So usually, our judgment of others is a projection of our own self-judgment. Our blame of others is a projection of our own guilt. So if we can look at these situations where we're triggered and then say, oh, this is what's happening, this is my own self-judgment, or this is my fear or whatever, and then pull those projections back in, we've shown the light of awareness onto these projections, and we've also signaled the universe that we want to heal these. Okay, and then the universe will give us steps to heal those. One of the ways we heal that is constantly witnessing, mindfulness, witnessing these reactions and pulling ourselves back into the present moment and witnessing the projections. But certainly a lot of other practices, our beliefs and fears are stored cellularly. So a lot of other practices might be, something like meditation or yoga or dance or, painting or anything that will help us to bring us in the body and pull us into the now.
So for you, do you have one method that worked better than others that you would recommend first?
My son told me the other day, he said, you're the only, I don't like spiritual based person or whatever that doesn't meditate. I meditated early on for a long time, but I explained to him that I do my life as a walking meditation. I'm constantly, even on this podcast right now, I can pull my attention back to the present, and it's like that base there, and then the current of our discussion is on top of that. So I am constantly trying to witness myself and pull my attention back within me to the present moment and see, where my what's happening within me. And that goes back to, I think it was Socrates who said, know thyself. Jesus said something like similar, know thyself. This is knowing thyself. And then when you become that, you become a master of yourself, and then you will not react from an unconscious place anymore. Let's say it's not gonna be black and white. You're gonna react less from an unconscious place, and at some point you will not react from an unconscious place anymore.
I love that idea too of becoming just mindfulness or meditation, becoming this a life practice. It doesn't have to be a moment in time.
Yeah, and that goes back to separation. The idea of duality, or people going to church on Sundays and being with God, but the other part of the week they're not. God is everywhere, and we have to see him and know him her everywhere. Okay. And so we need to be looking everywhere, and then she will be talking to us in so many different types of situations. So for me, nature's a big thing. Animals, are communicating with me all the time. Yeah. My dreams, just when you open up and you ask for it, you will be richly blessed. And then you just got to follow the steps.
Is there such a thing as a state of mind that is fearless? That's one question. But the other one is about if there is a kind of fear that is healthy, actually.
So let me answer the second part first. So to me, all fear is good, because fear is a pointer. So there's there's fears that are kind of what we call like buried in our DNA, that are ancestral. So like when a growling dog is coming at us, we want to run, or we want to take precautions, or we want to walk on ice, we want to walk slowly, or we don't want to jump off a bridge on a dare. Okay, we should be fearful of that. So there's certain fears that are based in us that are productive for us, but the vast majority of fears that we hold are not productive for us, because they keep us in a prison cell of our own making. But I say that fear is good, because that fear is acting as a pointer to what's underneath it that needs addressing. Okay. So fear is not, listen, anything in the universe is not good or bad. It's just what it is and how it can serve us. And so fear is an energy, and we can transform that into an amazing product for us that boosts our creative abilities and gives us all this additional great stuff. But we got to transform it from how we see it and how we use it into something much better. And what was the first part of your question?
Wow, I love that understanding. Was fearless, if it is possible to become fearless.
Absolutely. So obviously, we're not going to get rid of fear like a growling dog, and we don't want to get rid of that fear. Okay, but on the other type of fear, absolutely, that's why we're here. Okay, and so that's what I want to encourage everybody. That is definitely you can do this. I mean, what I've done is no different than what anybody else can do, or anybody else is doing. You just have to want it. We're all divine beings. We have such amazing, holy, creative powers, and God runs through each of us, expresses through each of us. There's nothing that we can't do, and that's exactly what Jesus told us.
What a beautiful message.
Thank you.
So we're almost at the end. I have a few more questions for you. Those are the ending questions. Would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book?
I mean, the only thing that I would add is that life is amazing and holy, and it's hard as hell sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, and it's basically like, and that's the way it's designed. I mean, it's going to be hard because we're being pushed, and so it's a lot easier to not resist. And just kind of trust and go with the flow. And when we do, and one of the things that's very important for us to have for ourselves is have self-compassion. That's extremely important. That's almost the most important thing, because then we're not judging ourselves and we can go through these healing processes much quicker.
Yes, and I do often write and talk about self-love. Do you connect those two terms, self-love and self-compassion, or this?
Yeah, actually, I think compassion is almost a higher form of love. It's definitely a higher form of love versus what we call the human love in this earth. And I think divine love and compassion are inseparable.
So the ending questions, this one I'll ask you, success. How do you define success these days? What is to be successful to you?
So I think it's important to not define success by societal terms. So I define success not by societal terms, but how basically how I'll define it by how kind I am, how much I react, how much I don't react from an unconscious place, how loving I am in my relationships, how present I am, how much joy I have in whatever I do. Those are the types of things that I define success that I can hold and I can do myself, and there's nothing on the outside I have to do those things.
What is another word for healing?
Another word for healing would be truth. I've not had that question, so that's what comes to me, truth.
If you knew you would die soon, meaning losing the body, would you make any change or do anything in a different way?
Not at this point. I believe that I feel good about where I'm at in life and what I've done, and hopefully I'm here for a lot longer and I'll be being of service to others. But I mean, the only thing I would do is make sure that I'm spending as much time with my family. If I knew I was dying in 3 months, I would basically just spend the time with my family.
And the last question is, what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of today? I mean, this reality, not life in general.
You're talking about this reality, like this 3D reality, or
the
divine
3D in a human body? Yeah.
We can't understand anything. Everything is gray. Okay, nothing is black and white. We're here, and we're love.
Thank you so much again for your beautiful presence, elevated presence, the wisdom that you allow to run through you into others, the love, the peace. Thank you, Lawrence.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
So the book is available both in e-form and in print form on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, Kobo, all those online retailers. If you go to you can go to lawrencedoochin.com. So LawrenceDoochin.com. And you can click to the Amazon link on there. You can also sign up for my email list, but you can also go to abookonfear.com and it will forward to my website.
Wonderful. I'll have those links on the podcast profile too. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Lawrence Doochin and his work, please visit lawrencedoochin.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.